So to talk about like what Mattia was chatting about yieldability. So in V3, a lot of types were structural. It's not technically possible,
No.
Max.
No, I think that you can't because you need like a contract to properly like serialize and deserialize
That's right,
values
that's
as they
right.
pass their threads, and that's not possible because you don't
That's
have a
right.
type system in JavaScript, so you cannot like infer that in any way. That's one
You
of the
would need
problems.
you would need a protocol up front, which is what the worker modules in effect allow you to do. Build your own protocol, but we can't like have a generic one for the fiber. It just doesn't work.
That's the point. Yeah.
Especially because you can't serialize methods. So there would be like no way for us to do that.
Yep. And also like
Mike says you would need shared memory and sync primitives, which we don't have.
in effect v3, most of the data types have been subtypes of effect. So that means that things like option, either, or fiber refs, or whatever, behind the scene, they were also an effect. So that means that you can, for example, do things like option.sum and pipe that into effect.flatmap, and you will get automatically an effect that had the typed option as a success and introduced automatically things like no such exception in your error channel. And while this sounds great because you can say, hey, I can have whatever be an effect, that causes problem with flattening. Because now if you do things like effect.flatmap, option.sum, now you get in trouble because now you are basically flat mapping an effect that has the value and no such element exception. So that is kind of unclear, I would say. Some people probably wouldn't see that, but initially it is unclear. Also, like I've responded to a lot of people saying, I have an effect, I have an exit, I have an option, I have an either. How do I convert those into an effect? And they were already effect, right? And that was in V3. Whereas in V4, we opted to yieldability. So that means that now those values, like your option we mentioned before, they are not an effect by default. If you want to have them as effects, you need to properly say dot as effect. And that will basically convert your option in the same structure you had before as an effect that succeeds with the number and can fail with no such element exception. Okay? So you still have this escape edge. But if you have been yielding that option inside of effect generator, they still behave the same way. Because in V4, we opted for yieldability. So whatever implements the effect yieldable interface can be yielded and produce values, errors, and introduce requirements. But it is not an effect subtype by default. And that avoids, as I mentioned before, things like auto-flattening that's kind of messing up mentally what you were thinking. So it is, in my opinion, a more stricter approach, which I personally like more. Someone may say, yeah, it was nice before to do just option.sum.pipe effect flatmap, whatever, but it introduces a lot of risk at type level.
Yeah, that was a really good summary. I think like exactly what Mattia said, like just to point out some concrete code examples, like what Mattia was saying. This is, I think, a really good example of what he was referring to in V3, where you can like use effect combinators on like option and ref and deferred or whatever. And this is like nice, but it's also hides subtle bugs like Mattia was referring to, right? Like there's what if you want to work with this option? Right? Like what if you want this to be an effect option number that you map? It's like very difficult to do this in V3. You need multiple combinators to get this back to an option of number, and it's annoying. So it's a very subtle class of bugs that can happen, that even like we encountered after we introduced these changes. So Mattia mentioned that like there's no we don't have effect subtyping is not a thing except for exit in v4. And instead, we've replaced subtyping with this yieldable trait, which is a much like narrower contract that allows you to like yield certain types and generators. And you can implement this for your own types if you want to, right? If you implement yieldable for a custom type, then that type becomes yieldable in generators. But it does not make the type assignable to effect. So again, in v3, this is possible. In v4, you explicitly have to do that transformation, like Mattia was saying, with dot as effect. But you can still yield the option if you want to. So,
so if you have been a nice guy and using effect.gen, effect.fn, and family.
When will the v4 beta docs be available or an llm.txt for v4? I don't know. I mentioned before that we're working on documentation. It's a focus of ours moving into the beta. We don't have any timeline, but we are rebuilding the docs site basically from the ground up. So stay tuned, but we don't have any timeline on an official docs like website for v4. We can probably get API documentation starting to be published if it's not already. I don't think, I can't remember if we have DocGen set up to publish the API docs for v4 yet. So we can certainly get that set up. So at least there's API docs rolling out. Yeah, so this is like, I agree with Mattia. This is like such a nice, it seems so dumb. And it also seems like maybe we're removing functionality, but this is such a,
it's such subtle, nice. Yeah.
It's such a subtle set of bugs that can happen. And so like just by having to make this explicit, it removes that whole class of bugs. And you still retain the ability to like do this in generators, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. So
I would say that you don't feel our nice ideas until you get hit by trying to find in like a quite medium-sized effect composition which of the member is introducing the no such element except error.
Yeah. Yep.
And until you get into that situation, you don't get the feel of like how nice this changes.